Okay, here we are. It's the end of movement in French turn 4. And now you have to sort of conjure up in your imagination that it's night time. Yes. So visibility is down to 200 yards. There's no rallying of routers. And there's another thing. There's no recovery from disorder. Oh my gosh. So what that means is, of course, on the next turn, I mean, we'll see what happens in this turn, but on the next turn, these chaps here, you see, the division commander, of course, moved so that they would be within his command radius, but they can't recover from their disorder because it's night time. Right, now we've got really unusual things going on, although it is actually, strangely, to this wargamer, it is actually rather familiar. Because, as I mentioned before, when I played Quatre Bras out, I did it in 6mm first of all, as you'll see on the channel, and then I also did it in 20mm with these type of figures. There, Quatre Bras, there was what was it? Standing crops, unusually high crops that they were. I think it was rye or barley or something like that, and so visibility was only 400 yards. So that meant that you couldn't just go charging somebody from a long distance away because you wouldn't be able to see them. So you had to get in close, stop, and then you could charge them. Well, now the difference here, of course, is because it's so short, 200 yards, when you're within 200 yards of the enemy, that's within musket range. So, of course, that means that you go forward, you stop, and there's a possibility that the enemy can fire at you. Now, that's not close musket range. Close musket range is 0, is contact, okay? So it's still not within close range, so they still cannot fire when it's not their turn unless they have been fired upon. So it leads to some interesting tactical situations, such as here, for example. So the French, as we can see, this unit was here. It's who are they? Let's call them by their name when we can. That's why they're labelled, after all. Yeah, let's see. Voirol. These chaps here were part of Duhem's division. They're no longer stationary. They've gone and they've moved forward to this position here. Now they've kind of come off to the left here when they've done that, and the reason they've done that is they want to be more than 200 yards away from this artillery over here. They know the artillery was there. They saw it before the sun set, and they're staying away from it because if they're beyond the range of visibility, then they can't fire on them. So there we go. Otherwise, they would have been in close range of the artillery, and they would have been able to fire at them. As I say, there's no close range for muskets. That's contact, so they are not allowed to fire at them. They could, however, if the Russians, were fired upon by the French. Now, the French are within range, but they're electing not to fire at them, because if they do, they can fire back. And if they fire, they're a brigade, a formed brigade. If they fire, they'd have 2 dice. They are a stationary formed brigade. They would have 4 dice. Okay? Right. So they're not doing that. Instead, a very bold maneuver here. These 2 battalions of horse artillery. It's important that they're horse artillery because they have the capability to limber up, move, and then unlimber, which they've done. And they've placed themselves squarely on the flank of this unit here. This is important. They get 1 dice each because they're not stationary, but because they're at close range, they're within the 200 paces, otherwise they wouldn't be able to see the enemy. They are going to be hitting on 4s, 5s, and 6s, so they've got high hopes there. They also have high hopes, though, however, because the first thing that's going to happen, because they are within the close range, the Russians are within the close range of the enemy, is they have to have a morale test, okay? Nobody else does, nobody else on the entire battlefield, but they have to have a morale test. Now, remember, if they fail their morale test, they will become disordered. And now it's nighttime, there is no recovery from disorder. So, big thing. So we shall see. Now they have the other thing, the other thing that happens at nighttime, so you've got no rallying, You've got 200 yards visibility. You've got no recovery from disorder. But also, every unit on the battlefield has its morale reduced by 1. So one has to really work hard to keep that in mind every time you take morale into consideration. So that means that this unit here, like the rest of all the Russian infantry, has got a morale of 5. Well, it's nighttime, so now it's got a morale of 4, but also it's being attacked with close range shooting from the flank. So that takes it down even further. It takes it down to a 3. So that means there's a 50-50 chance that it will fail this morale test. And if it does, it's disordered. And as we said, that means it's permanently disordered. Okay, so let's roll it up. Okay, well, they passed. Okay, that's less than the number that we came up with. So they passed the morale test. Right. Well, there's all that drama and they rolled a 2. So well done, Russians. Okay, so now we've got that out of the way. Now we can go on to the firing. So it's just from these two. Yeah, not much else really to talk about here. There's no saving throw. They're going to be looking for 6s for hits. Let's see what they can come up with. No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're close range. They're looking at 4, 5, or 6 for a hit. And it doesn't matter. I don't have to roll them separately. We just roll them up. Looking for 4, 5s, and 6s. Well, we got 1. So we got 1 hit on the Russians after all that big theatrical introduction. Let's go ahead and take care of that. Okay, there we go. It's Poltorotsky's division, brigade, Udom's division. And we can see there from the marker that they've taken the hit. And now, of course, this is the division where earlier in the battle, in this position here, their brother brigade was here, and that's been completely destroyed. So we're now in a position where if they actually take 1 more hit, that division is exhausted. So that means that will be an exhausted division for the Russians, and the French at the moment have 1. No, they have 2 exhausted divisions, don't they? Yes, of course, they've lost an entire corps. Yeah, so there we go. Let's see, what else? What else can we talk about? We can talk about, let's see, right, other things that happened. I'm a bit zoomed in here, aren't I? Right, there we go. Well, maybe it'd be nice to be zoomed in for a change. Okay, let's try that. Yeah, so the remnant of the Victor's, it was Victor, wasn't it? Yeah, Victor's corps finally got themselves into the line here. So these are the Réserve de Paris, okay, these two, under Gérard. There he is, there's Gérard. Going to back up a bit. Right, actually, we'll go back to regular zoom because it's a bit wobbly. There we go. Yes, so there they are. They've taken up their position in the line. They're not stationary yet, okay? And they, as I say, they're poorly trained regulars, so basically that means they don't get a free-facing change. They also have no elites, which is a factor in melee ties, right? So they are slightly inferior troops. And as I say, because of the problem with the well, we might call it the night vision, the limited visibility at night, more like, because obviously one might look at this situation and sort of say, "Good God, man, French commander! Good God, Bonaparte! What do you think you're doing? You've got your artillery hanging out here. You've got 3 enemy cavalry brigades over there. They can just sweep down majestically onto the..." Well, no, they can't. You see. No, you can't charge things that you can't see at the start of your move. So they could roll down here right up to these chaps. They'd have to stop when they were 100 yards away. And then, of course, the artillery can just limber up. And in Volley and Bayonet, it's unusual in Volley and Bayonet in that all units can pass through other units with impunity. The idea is that like a brigade of infantry represents several regiments of infantry that are not, they are not a solid block like this. There are gaps between the units, and the artillery, or anybody else for that matter, could they can limber up and they just move. They could literally go that way if they wanted to. They could go like through there like that, just down to there. This cavalry, these are Russians, right? If they had enough distance, this cavalry could go over here like that, just straight through there. Doesn't matter. That's the way it works. Right, so therefore, if the Russians come forward, which surely they will, but if they come forward, the artillery can either, if they want to sign their own death warrant, they can sit there and pivot around and fire at the cavalry. But artillery pivoting is movement, so they wouldn't be stationary. So it'd be a bit of a risk. Or if they were a bit more sensible, they would limber up and they would move back here behind the infantry. The idea, what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to make something happen with that end unit. Yes, you chaps there. Before the marauding cavalry show up, and there's not going to be a lot of time elapsing before that happens, presumably. Yes, but anyway, it's going to be an interesting experience as we sort of feel our way around in the dark, literally. Because, as I say, it's a bit like the Quatre Bras situation, but the difference is that now when you find the enemy, you're, if you move within 200 yards, you're within range of enemy musketry. So, of course, as I said, in the situation here, for example, they chose not to fire at them, so that would mean that they weren't entitled to fire back at them in the French turn. But now, of course, what's coming up next is the Russian turn. So in the Russian turn, they are within range. So the Russians can fire 4 dice at the incoming infantry, and then because they're stationary, and they can fire back with 2 dice. Let's see here. Yep. And of course, it's unlikely that the artillery are going to be firing at them again, because if the Russians move the cavalry up there, the artillery would be very wise to retire back to the safety of their lines. So, okay, so it's finally nighttime. Let's have a think about the big picture of what's going on. I think essentially right now it sure looks like we're heading for what's it called? A very impressive or a strategic or something like that victory on the part of the Russians, because to get that, what they have to do is hang on to Brienne le Château, hang on to the actual chateau itself, which is under there somewhere, and also hang on to their line of communication. And at the moment, it sure looks like they've got a really good chance of doing that. It's the onus is on the French to get in there and start breaking that lot up, and of course with the loss of 4 cavalry brigades, that sort of changes the balance somewhat. So it's hard. It's kind of hard to imagine. I mean, if they face off against one another and just sort of line up and try to form barriers and all that sort of thing, then the French are going to lose. Okay, it's their job to get in and disrupt. The one thing I did think about was I'm not quite sure, because this whole nighttime thing, I'm not quite sure that I have this sort of feel for it at the moment, because I mean, of course, you've got this situation here, and if the Russian cavalry, were to say, "Oh, look, infantry that's not stationary, let's go and charge it." Okay, well, as I say, the problem is they can't. They can gallop right up to it and then stop. And then the infantry, in their turn, can fire at them. And heaven help them if the infantry was stationary as well, because the infantry could fire at them with 4 dice per brigade. So the infantry, of course, they can't charge the cavalry. So that's just not allowed. So because it was just completely against the doctrine, or the cavalry would have run away if they were, the infantry had any chance of actually doing damage to them. It didn't happen anyway. So therefore, I suppose if the cavalry are blocking the route, all the infantry can do is sort of like inch forward and keep on giving them sort of fusillades of musketry. And then I suppose eventually they would, what would they do? They would cause casualties. They would probably cause the cavalry at some point perhaps to become disordered. Then eventually the cavalry would rout. So I suppose they could sort of like machete their way through doing that. So in that case, it would be more in the Russian interest. I don't know. No, that is interesting, isn't it? Of course, the thing is, of course, is that because they have so many cavalry units, I mean, they've got the light cavalry, which if they do that and they just form them into sort of standard light cavalry units, non-skirmishing, they don't pack much of a punch, but they are units that can't just be swept aside. So if they reform their skirmishers, that means they've got 7 cavalry units. So with that, of course, if this corps, the corps under Ney, for example, yes, the reserve of the guard. If they sort of say, right, we're going to go down here, we're going to push all the cavalry before us, and we're just going to march over here and cut off the line of communication, surely somewhere along the way, the cavalry, because they have so many units, are going to be able to get around their flank, get around their rear, attack them from the rear. Well, it doesn't matter if you're stationary, if you attack from the rear. So they would be able to outmaneuver them. They just sort of literally run rings around them, and do that sort of that sort of thing. So I don't know, Well, I don't know. And here we are. It's the end of Russian movement on the 4th Russian turn, 6 p.m. here at Brienne, 1814, January 29th, I think. Yes, as we can see, there's been considerable movement on the part of the Russian forces, and they're trying to stem the movement of the French. Is the Ney, there's old Ney there, you see, and his guard, reserve, what are they? Reserve guard, corps, yes, and they're all voltigeurs as well, so you see, so they're top-notch chaps. And yes, they're all getting ready to go this way. And right, so anyway, the cavalry is swept forward to get in their way, basically. They've gone as far forward as they can, because, of course, remember, it's pitch black now, it's nighttime, and they can't charge somebody who is not in sight at the beginning of their charge, so they have to stop before they contact them, and they're not allowed to go any closer than 100 yards in volley and bayonet. They've stopped short. They've stopped short, actually, of being able to see them even, which sounds a bit odd. But the reason they're doing this is not so that they can charge them next turn. What they're trying to do is get in the way. They're trying to stop the French from being able to just waltz over here and go to the line of communication, which is this road here, remember, leading down there to the town whose name I can't remember at the moment, but pressing on. Yes, it's got it written down somewhere, obviously. We'll come to it. Right, so let's go through in detail and take a look at what happened all along the Russian line. Well, basically, you've got Palin here. There's Palin, and his forces sort of gathered about him, including this unit of hussars here. And they're just sort of creeping forward, as it were. So you've got the Uhlans, which are still just deployed in skirmish formation. You've got the Cossacks, which have reformed. And these chaps are moving forward, including the hussars, as I said. So they're getting ready to just get in the way of that lot. Then we have Vasilichikov. Same sort of thing going on with him, really. Moving chaps forward, including these 2 brigades of cavalry. Grouchy has been sort of skedaddled sideways. In Volley and Bayonet, you can't actually attack division, corps, or army commanders. They just sort of get pushed out of the way. And so, yes, so don't fixate on him being destroyed or something. If they move forward even further, we'd have to actually pop him over there just to get him out of the way, or pop him to somewhere convenient. So they've come to that point there. Now on the next turn, the thing is they are outside musket range. So on the French turn, the French can't say, right, we're going to go stationary and fire at the cavalry, because they're beyond musket range. They're not only beyond musket range, they're beyond their vision as well. So the French have got to decide what they're going to do. The two units of Cossacks here, two brigades of Cossacks, or well, I suppose they're regiments actually, aren't they? They're on brigade basis because they are deployed for skirmishing. They belong to Vasilichikov's. I am saying that right. Yeah, Vasilichikov's corps, and they have headed down towards the French guns, the two battalions of artillery that they have here. They've stopped. They've gone as far forward as they can, and they've stopped. Guns can't fire at them, obviously. They're not facing them. And then what else have we got? These guns, basically, they were stationary. They've pivoted in this general direction. Things are getting pretty congested at this point. There was a situation over here which was not very attractive on the Russian side, and it concerned this brigade here and this brigade here. I put the wagon wheel down there just as a reminder. I can take it off now as a reminder to us that that unit was out of command. That was a serious staff work error on part of the Russian commander, who I personally know very well. There we go. And yes, unfortunately, they were too far away from their commander, so they were out of command. And that meant that they couldn't make a move towards the enemy. It meant that they could still do a free formation change, a free facing, change. But if they wanted to make any movement at all, it would make them disordered. And that is what happened, because it was determined that what they had to do was move away from these French guns. Otherwise, they would have been forced to take a morale test. And there was a good chance that they would have become disordered. And things would have looked bad, because then the French guns in their turn would have been able to fire on them and all that sort of thing. So... right, and then, so that's what happened there. They had to back off slightly, and in so doing, they've disordered themselves, but they are now back in command. These chaps, on the other hand, let me get the name. Right, this brigade that's in the center of the picture right now, they were the ones at the end of the long line there on the Russian right, and they were in a pickle. Now, actually, I made some notes on this so I could get this pretty straight, because it was there was quite a lot of irreducible logic here, as it were. So there's, as I say, Poltorotsky's brigade, and it was determined that they would have to test morale again, because they were within the close range of the enemy. They were morale of 5, which is reduced by 1 because it's nighttime, and reduced by 1 because of flank fire. So their morale would have been 3. So they would have had a 50-50 chance of becoming disordered from the morale test. Then they would have been fired on again by the French artillery, 2 units firing at them at close range. So that meant that because they're hitting on 4, 5s, and 6s, there was a good chance. I mean, the basic probability would have been certainty that they would have been hit. Of course, you know, the probability doesn't mean that it would actually happen, but there was a very good chance that they would have been hit. And at that point, the division would have been exhausted. So it's determined that, as sometimes happens in Volley and Bayonet, what you have to do in order to keep an eye on your victory conditions, as you might imagine, and it's realistic, is you've got the division is being whittled down, and if it's coming awfully close to being exhausted, like especially one strength point away, which is the case with that division, then it's time to pull those chaps back. What they did, however, instead of just completely removing themselves from the battle, what they did instead was they pulled back so that they are out of the vision of the enemy. And that means that they don't have to test morale, and it means that they don't have to, it means that they cannot be fired upon. So they're temporarily, they cannot suffer any damage now in the upcoming French turn, because the French can't see them. actually, well, there is one loose, there's a loose end in that, isn't there? Yeah, the French artillery could move forward to put them back into close range again. And that was a gamble that the Russian commander was willing to take. Right. So they're there. What have they done? They have moved away from the enemy, and they've also done a facing change to face the enemy a bit more at an angle there. Let's see. Further up the Russian line, everybody else stayed pat. They haven't moved. And so that's the lot. Now, that means that, let's see. I think that means that there are actually, by the design of the Russian commander, I think that means that there are no morale tests. I'll just check that again. Right, so here, looking from a slightly different angle, that's the situation. And indeed, there are no morale tests because no one's in contact and no one is within close range of the enemy in a situation where they can fire upon one another because they can see each other. Right. So, so that's it. There's no combat, and there are no. We don't have to recalculate. We don't have to test for. We don't have to check for division exhaustion because no one suffered any casualties. We don't have to check for morale collapse because no one suffered any casualties. So now it is on to the French, what would that be? The French fifth turn. And here we are. It's the end of movement in French turn 5, which is 7 p.m. We have total darkness, and so visibility is 200 yards. What the French, let's see, first of all, they checked for command. Everybody was in command, no problem there. And let's work our way along the line and see what happened. Okay, this battalion of artillery here has stayed exactly where it was. It unlimbered and became stationary. Because remember, limbering and unlimbering counts as a free facing change, and so therefore it doesn't involve movement, so therefore they can become stationary. Right. But, I mean, they're not pointing at anyone in particular yet. They're just keeping an eye on the extreme left flank of the French, which has no cavalry down here. There's cavalry there, but not much. Okay. Then Ney, with his entire corps, 2 divisions, they've moved forward, and they've moved as far as they can. The absolute maximum distance they can without entering the 100 yards zone of control, as it were, in front of the enemy. They have to stop there if they're not going to go into contact with them, and they couldn't because they couldn't see them. They can't charge them anyway. They can't charge cavalry. It's prohibited. So they've moved to that position because then, of course, they've stopped now, and now they can open fire. So, as we can see, they are not stationary, so they're brigade firing, and they've got 2 dice. So each brigade has got 2 dice, and they're basically going to be firing at what's in front of them. These chaps are skirmishing, so they're going to be harder to hit, presumably. Let's see, what else? In the sort of traffic jam in the centre, the artillery, as I said, you can just wheel it straight through any unit you like, but the commander decided instead that they were worth the sacrifice if that's what's going to happen to them, because what they want to do is blast the Russians, just stay in position and blast the Russians. So these have faced the Cossacks over here. They are at close range, so they will be hitting on a 4, 5, or 6. They're not stationary because they had to pivot, which, unlike infantry, if artillery does it, it's not a free facing change, so it does cost, so therefore they are no longer stationary. So, and then here, these chaps are going to be firing again at close range. 4, 5, or 6 is a hit on those there. Okay, then we had, let's see, as we can see, the line down here in general has advanced. The idea was to get both these units up to here. They couldn't charge them because they were too far away. They were beyond vision range. So they've moved forward into musket range so that they can fire at them, as we can see, with 2 dice each. Because they are being fired on, they can fire back. And the key thing with the Russians is, and I may have forgotten this, I think once so far in the battle, is that they have dedicated guns. So, there's a thought. Oh my goodness me. That changes quite a bit. I just realized the guards down here, they all have dedicated guns. Little hard on the cavalry. I'd forgotten about that. Let's sort that out.